Have you ever noticed the way his eyes linger on you when he thinks you're not watching? That unspoken moment where time seems to pause, and something inside you whispers that it means more than he could ever say out loud. You see, the truth is that love rarely enters our lives with a grand announcement. It doesn't always scream through dramatic gestures or perfectly chosen words. Often, it hides in silence, in the accidental glances, in the subtle shifts of energy that the mind tries to ignore, but the soul cannot. And what if I told you that the man who sometimes confuses you with his distance, his mixed signals, or his quiet demeanor may actually be far more in love with you than even he realizes himself? Carl Jung once said that the unconscious never lies. Beneath the surface of his words, beyond the mask of control that he wears for the world, his soul is already making decisions on his behalf. And if you look closely, you'll see that those decisions point directly to you. Love doesn't always arrive through logic or confession. Sometimes it moves through the smallest cracks, through dreams, through the way his breathing shifts when you enter the room, through how his attention sharpens when you speak, even if he doesn't fully understand why. Many women mistake silence for indifference, but silence can carry more truth than words. The most authentic kind of love doesn't come wrapped in promises. It reveals itself in transformation. It shows in the way his world subtly reorients itself around you, even before he dares to call it love. And here is the paradox. While his conscious mind may hesitate, his soul has already chosen. That is why his behavior betrays him. That is why, no matter how much he tries to rationalize, his energy keeps drawing him back to you. Think about it. When he remembers small details you didn't expect him to notice, when he worries about your safety without making a big scene, when he lingers in your presence as though leaving would cost him something invisible. These are not coincidences. They are signs of a connection that is already alive in him. And if you pay attention, you'll realize that what you are witnessing is not just attraction. It's resonance. Jung believed that what remains unconscious eventually manifests as fate. In love, this means that even if he hasn't admitted his feelings to himself, his soul is already moving in alignment with you. That is why his attention changes when you are around. Not the shallow kind of attention that seeks validation, but something deeper, quieter. He begins to notice the tone of your voice, the slightest changes in your mood, the things you don't even say. His presence sharpens as though your existence calls him to a level of awareness he doesn't have with anyone else. And maybe you've seen this. Maybe you've wondered why he seems different with you, why his laughter feels more unguarded, why his silences with you don't feel empty, but heavy with meaning. This isn't performance. This isn't strategy. This is the raw, unfiltered side of him that only emerges when love disarms him. Because true love doesn't polish someone into perfection. It strips away the masks and leaves them human, vulnerable, exposed, and more real than ever before. But there's something even deeper. When a man begins to unconsciously care for you, checking if you're warm, if you've eaten, if you're safe walking home, it's not about control. It's not about playing the role of protector for the sake of appearing strong. It's because something within him has already accepted you as part of his world, as though your well-being is somehow tied to his own. And that is one of the most powerful indicators of love, because it comes not from obligation, but from instinct. And I want you to pause for a moment and think about this. How many times have you dismissed his quiet efforts as ordinary? How often have you overlooked the way he adjusts his schedule just to see you, or remembers things you said weeks ago, or shows up in unexpected ways? These are not random acts. They are the unconscious language of love. They are the soul's way of confessing, before the lips find the courage to follow. When he reacts to your emotions, when your joy lights up his face, or your sadness unsettles him, even if he doesn't know what to say, that's not weakness. That's love in its purest form, unrefined, unspoken, but undeniable. His energy shifts with yours, because he is tied to you in ways that defy logic. And when that happens, when his balance depends on your balance, when his calm is disturbed by your pain, you are witnessing a soul connection that goes far beyond passing interest. So don't be deceived by his hesitations, his silences, or his lack of declarations. Sometimes the loudest truths live in the quietest gestures. If you watch with your heart instead of just your ears, you'll see it. His actions already know what his mind is still struggling to admit, that he is more in love with you than even he dares to realize. And this is only the beginning, because as we go deeper, the signs become even more revealing, and you'll start to understand the profound truth that when love is real, it cannot be hidden forever. The soul always finds a way to speak. There comes a moment when words are no longer necessary, when a man's presence speaks more loudly than any promise. Perhaps he hasn't told you he loves you. Perhaps he hasn't drawn out elaborate plans for a shared future. Yet you feel it in the way the air shifts when he's near, in how his silence beside you doesn't feel empty but full, like a conversation taking place beneath language itself. This is the kind of silence Jung hinted at. Not an absence, but a deeper form of presence, a communion that the conscious mind struggles to explain. Watch carefully the way he responds when others speak of you. If someone praises you, notice the light that flickers in his eyes. If someone criticizes you, even gently, see how his expression hardens or his posture shifts. These reactions aren't rehearsed, they're instinctive. Love doesn't need conscious approval to defend what it values. His unconscious steps forward to protect you, revealing that you've already become precious to him in ways his mind may not yet grasp. And then there is effort. True affection doesn't always arrive as flowers or dramatic gestures. It emerges in the subtle ways he makes space for you. He listens closely, remembers the details you didn't expect him to, adjusts his schedule when you need him, or apologizes when he feels he has fallen short. These quiet efforts are the fingerprints of love. They are proof that his inner world has already begun to reorganize itself, to include you, not out of duty, not out of performance, but out of a pull he cannot resist. You'll notice, too, that something about him begins to change, even when you're not around. His routine shifts. His thoughts scatter more easily. He grows restless, distracted, as if some invisible force has entered his life and refuses to let go. That force is you. Jung once wrote of the power of inner figures, those unseen presences that reshape a person's psyche without physical contact. Without realizing it, you've become one of those figures inside his world, a living presence inhabiting his mind and spirit, whether or not he admits it. This is why you must never mistake quietness for emptiness. Many men don't speak of what they feel, not because they lack depth, but because it is almost impossible to translate the language of the soul into the language of words. Yet their actions, their energy, their subtle transformations say everything that words cannot. If you're paying attention, you can sense what he himself hasn't yet discovered, that his heart has already chosen, long before his logic is ready to catch up. Think of the way his walls begin to crumble. Maybe he was once the man who avoided commitments, who kept emotional distance, who lived comfortably behind his independence. But since you entered his life, the patterns that once seemed immovable begin to loosen. He starts to share parts of himself he never offered to anyone else. His regrets, his fears, his childhood dreams. And he does this not to impress you, not to manipulate you, but because, for the first time, he feels safe enough to surrender pieces of his soul. That is the quiet revolution of love. It is not conquest. It is not seduction. It is surrender. Jung said the soul requires a mirror to see itself, and in you, he has found that mirror. You reflect back to him not only his light, but also his shadows, and instead of running, he lingers, because through you, he is beginning to recognize who he truly is. Watch also how he responds to your emotions. When your joy radiates, his own spirit lifts, as though your happiness has entered his bloodstream. And when sorrow darkens your face, you see the unease ripple through him, even if he has no words to offer. His energy bends with yours, like a tide pulled by a hidden moon. That quiet pull is one of the clearest signs of unconscious love. A man who is indifferent can stand untouched by your emotions, but a man whose soul has already tied itself to yours cannot remain still. Your feelings move through him as if they were his own. Perhaps the most revealing sign of all comes in your absence. If he speaks of you when you're not there, if he saves stories to tell you later, if you find yourself present in his thoughts even when no physical presence reminds him, then you've already entered the deepest layers of his being. What remains when you're gone is more powerful than what's displayed when you're near. That lingering presence is the language of the soul, whispering truths his conscious mind has not yet dared to claim. So many people wait for declarations, for promises, for clear words, but the essence of love rarely begins that way. It begins in the unguarded moments, the shift of his breathing, the way he remembers what you thought he forgot, the instinct to protect you without fanfare, the presence that doesn't fade when you're apart. Those are the signs of something undeniable, something far beyond chance. And once you learn to read this language, once you attune yourself to the way the soul speaks, you'll realize that love is not about guessing or begging for clarity. It is about noticing what the heart already knows. It is about listening to what resonates, even in silence. Because when a man is more in love with you than he realizes, his words may hesitate, but his soul does not. His actions, his instincts, his quiet transformations, these are the proof. The truth is already written in him, and all that remains is time for his mind to catch up to what his spirit has chosen. There comes a stage when his behavior shifts so subtly that even he doesn't fully understand what's happening. He finds himself seeking your presence, not out of habit, not out of dependency, but because something in him feels unsteady when you are too far away. He may not say it aloud, but you'll notice it in his restlessness when he hasn't heard from you, in how he reappears just when you were beginning to forget him, in the way he invents excuses just to return to your orbit. This isn't obsession. It isn't emotional weakness. It is the undeniable gravity of real connection, the kind that pulls him toward you from a depth beyond logic. Carl Jung explained that the unconscious doesn't operate by rules of time or reason. When an authentic feeling takes root there, it spreads quietly, shaping thoughts, impulses, and choices in ways we can't always explain. That's why he begins to involve you in his life, in ways you didn't expect. He asks your opinion about his plans, even the ones that don't concern you directly. He shares his doubts, his insecurities, his inner struggles. not because he sees you as a solution to his problems, but because his soul has recognized you as a safe place, a presence before which he no longer needs armor. And when a man reaches this level of openness, the walls that once protected him no longer matter. Love doesn't thrive in certainty. It thrives in vulnerability, in the quiet courage of showing one's imperfect self without fear of being judged. That trust, even when it isn't deliberate, is a rare and sacred expression of love. Listen closely to his language, not just his words, but the slips between them. When he speaks of the future and says, "Someday I'd love to go there," notice how in his imagination you're already by his side. He may not state it directly, but you're present in his vision of tomorrow. These unconscious references are powerful because they reveal that in the deepest parts of his psyche, you are no longer separate from his path. You've already become part of the story he tells himself about his life. This isn't something you need to force. It isn't something you need to demand. When love grows from the soul, it reveals itself naturally. A simple phrase, an unguarded image of the future, an instinct to include you. It's his unconscious telling the truth his mind hasn't yet fully spoken. And what happens when love matures further is even more profound. He begins to look at you not as someone he wants for a season, but as something he cannot imagine losing. Without realizing it, his inner world starts reorganizing itself around your existence. Priorities shift. Time reshapes. Even in the chaos of his life, he finds a way to show up. Not because he feels obligated, but because being near you brings him a peace he cannot find anywhere else. Peace. This is one of the most underrated signs of real love. Too often we think love is only about passion, butterflies, or constant excitement. But Jung understood that the deepest kind of love doesn't just ignite fire. It creates stillness. It offers a sense of home, an inner refuge where both of you can simply exist without needing to perform. When he feels this with you, when he can lay down his defenses and simply breathe in your presence, that is when he begins to see you as more than a partner. He begins to see you as home. And from that sense of belonging arises another transformation. He begins to align himself with you without even being asked. He takes interest in the things you love, not to mimic you or lose himself, but because sharing becomes natural. He grows curious about your passions, about the ideas and experiences that light you up. His individuality remains, but it expands to make space for yours. This is the quiet merging of two inner worlds, what Jung described as the resonance of souls. But perhaps one of the most powerful indicators of this hidden love is how he defends you when you're not there. Maybe you'll never witness it, but in conversations with others, when your name comes up, his instinct is to protect you. He speaks with loyalty, with quiet conviction. Not to impress, not to earn credit, but because something inside him refuses to let your image be harmed. That, too, is love. Not the loud kind that demands recognition, but the kind that acts in silence, in moments unseen. So if you notice him adjusting his life without realizing it, if you sense that he's woven you into his choices, if you see how his loyalty reveals itself in small, unseen ways, don't dismiss it. These are not coincidences. You are witnessing a profound truth, one that even he may not yet comprehend. Because what happens in the unconscious is always bigger than what the conscious mind admits. And when love has taken root there, it cannot be hidden forever. It transforms everything. It softens his defenses. It shifts his rhythms. It rearranges his world until you are no longer an addition, but an essential part of his very being. And when you step back and look at the whole picture, his subtle gestures, his silences, his quiet care, you begin to understand the most important truth of all. Real love doesn't need to declare itself loudly. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't require perfection. It reveals itself in presence, in peace, in loyalty that doesn't need to be seen. That is when you know he is far more in love with you than even he realizes. When a man reaches the point where his soul has already chosen, his entire being begins to shift, even in ways he doesn't consciously recognize. His habits change, his priorities realign, and his once clear routines begin to bend around your presence. It's not something he plans. It's not something he could even explain if asked. It is the quiet but unstoppable movement of love taking root in the deepest part of him. And here lies a truth that too many overlook. Real love doesn't always arrive with thunder. It doesn't always come in fireworks or perfect declarations. Sometimes it moves like a whisper, unnoticed at first, until suddenly it has changed everything. When you step back and truly see what has happened, you realize that the man before you is no longer the same. His actions, his silences, the smallest of gestures, they all carry the unmistakable weight of a heart that is already surrendered, even if he hasn't admitted it. Carl Jung reminded us that the unconscious never lies. Beneath the layers of hesitation, behind the fear of rejection or the scars of his past, there exists a truth that cannot be hidden. It reveals itself through symbols, through patterns, through behaviors that seem small, but are in fact monumental. When he pauses longer than necessary just to watch you, when he remembers something you mentioned once in passing, when his entire body softens the moment you walk into a room. These are not accidents. They are his soul speaking in a language his mind hasn't yet learned to translate. And here is what makes it even more powerful. True love isn't fragile. It doesn't dissolve with the first storm. Yes, there may be silences. Yes, there may be moments of doubt or distance. But even in those pauses, something remains. An invisible thread pulling him back toward you. Because when love is born of the soul, it does not shatter. It waits. It bends. It weathers the storm until clarity returns. Jung spoke often of individuation, the journey each person takes toward becoming their true self. Along that journey, we meet others who resonate with us at a level beyond logic, beyond circumstance. And when that resonance happens, when two people recognize each other in that deeper place, it is no longer about completing one another. It is about walking side by side, not out of need, but out of choice. This is why, even when he doubts himself, even when he wrestles with fears of inadequacy or ghosts from his past, you'll notice something remarkable. Despite the fear, he stays. Despite the doubt, he never fully walks away. His actions contradict his hesitations because his soul has already begun to recognize you as home. And home is not a place he can abandon, no matter how lost he may feel in his own mind. You see it in the way he becomes restless when you're gone, in the way he instinctively tries to protect you, in how he begins to place his trust in you without demanding guarantees, to show you his mistakes, his contradictions, his vulnerability. That is not weakness. It is one of the purest forms of surrender a man can offer. Because we only let our guard down before what we feel is safe, what we feel is true. And if you look closely, you'll realize that what he offers you is not the loud kind of love that performs for the world. It is quieter. It doesn't shout. It doesn't chase recognition. It doesn't need witnesses. It is the love that remains steady when no one is watching. The love that stays, that shows up, that chooses you again and again in ways so subtle they could be missed. unless you're paying attention with your heart. That is why this love is so powerful, because it does not depend on the moment. It does not depend on passion that flares and burns out. It depends on connection, on resonance, on the deep knowing that two souls have recognized each other. And once that recognition happens, no amount of logic, no amount of denial can undo it. Yes, there will be days when he falters, days when fear convinces him he isn't enough, days when old wounds whisper lies into his ear. But even then, something in him remains tied to you. Even then, the invisible thread pulls him back. Because when the soul has already chosen, the mind eventually has no choice but to follow. And you, if you have noticed these signs, if you have felt them in your bones, then trust yourself. You are not imagining things. You are perceiving the subtle language of the soul, a language that can't be faked, a language that reveals a bond far deeper than timing, circumstances, or conscious certainty. This love doesn't need to be rushed. It doesn't need to be forced. It unfolds like a dance. Sometimes one leads while the other waits. Sometimes both move in perfect rhythm, without rehearsal, without effort. And in that dance, something sacred is revealed. Something that doesn't need explanation because it simply is. Jung taught us that the truest parts of ourselves don't live at the surface. They live deep within, in dreams, in symbols, in emotions that rise without warning. And that is exactly where love, when it is real, makes its home. In that untouchable part of the soul, untouched by fear, untouched by masks, untouched by the lies we tell ourselves. So if you see him changing, if you see his habit bending around you, if you notice his energy softening in your presence, believe it. Even if he hasn't said the words, even if he doesn't yet realize it himself, his soul has already chosen you. And you who feel this too, you're not here by accident. You are standing before something rare, something real, something that few ever experience. A love that doesn't demand, doesn't force, doesn't need to shout. A love that builds itself in silence, gesture by gesture, until one day, without warning, it becomes certainty. And when that day comes, when he finally finds the courage to say what his soul has known all along, you won't need a promise. You won't need reassurance. Because you'll already know. You've been walking together all along, not out of necessity, but out of choice, out of the quiet but unshakable certainty that real love doesn't shout. Real love transforms. There is a moment, quiet and almost imperceptible, when everything becomes clear. Not because he makes a dramatic confession, not because he offers promises beneath the stars, but because his very being has shifted. You notice it in the way he carries you within him, even in silence. You sense it in how his presence lives inside you, not as a fleeting thought, but as something steady, something permanent. That is when you understand. The choice has already been made, long before the words arrive. His soul has chosen you. Real love doesn't rush to declare itself. It doesn't need constant reassurance. It reveals itself in the small pauses, in the consistency of gestures, in the way he keeps returning, even when doubt and fear try to pull him away. What endures through absence, what lingers when logic argues against it, that is love at its purest form. And when you recognize this, when you begin to trust what your intuition already knows, you realize that doubt is often nothing more than the mind struggling to catch up with what the soul already understands. Jung believed that the deepest connections between human beings transcend our conscious awareness. They emerge from the hidden layers of the self, from the place untouched by pretense, fear, or calculation. That is why, when you look at him and see the quiet effort, the unconscious protection, the vulnerability he offers without meaning to, you are not just seeing affection, you are witnessing recognition at the level of being itself. Because love, when it is true, is not a performance. It is not about dazzling words or flawless actions. It is about the resonance between two souls that cannot help but reshape their worlds around each other. It is about the invisible gravity that keeps pulling him back into your life. It is about the way he lets you see him, unguarded, imperfect, human, and still chooses to stay. And maybe you've noticed how your own soul responds, how something inside you softens when he is near, how you feel calmer, clearer, more yourself in his presence. That, too, is not coincidence. When two souls resonate, they become mirrors for each other. Through you, he begins to see himself. Through him, you begin to see yourself more clearly. And in that reflection, transformation happens. Love of this kind does not demand completion. It does not ask one person to fix another. It asks only for the courage to walk together. To share the journey not out of emptiness, but out of abundance. To choose, not because of need, but because the soul has already recognized its counterpart. And when he looks at you with that gaze, the one that lingers as though you are something sacred, you realize that this is not ordinary. This is not temporary. This is love that has outgrown the mind's categories and the world's expectations. This is the kind of love that builds not castles in the air, but refuge on solid ground. Yes, there will still be moments of fear, times when he doubts his worth, when he wonders if he is enough for you, times when he falters, when his wounds resurface, when his past whispers shadows into his present. But even then, watch closely. Despite all of it, he remains. Despite the inner battle, he finds his way back. Because his soul has already made a home in you, and that kind of home cannot be abandoned. This is why true love is both fragile and indestructible. Fragile because it requires vulnerability. Indestructible because once the soul chooses, it will always find its way back. The storms may come, the silence may stretch, the doubts may rise, but the resonance remains, constant and unshaken. And so if you've recognized these signs, if you've seen him change in ways he doesn't even notice, if you've felt his energy shift with yours, if you've experienced his presence in your absence, then listen to that truth. Don't dismiss it as fantasy. Don't silence it with fear. You are standing before something rare, something sacred, something that most people spend a lifetime searching for and never find. Because love, when it is real, doesn't shout. It doesn't force. It doesn't bargain. It simply is. It exists in the silence, in the unspoken, in the spaces between words. It exists in the way he pauses just a little longer to watch you, in the way he defends you without being asked, in the way he reorganizes his life without realizing why. It exists in the peace that falls over him when he is near you, in the way his heart softens, in the way he lets himself be vulnerable, because with you, he feels safe. And if you feel this too, if you recognize in yourself the same pull, then know this. You are not here by accident. You're not imagining the depth of this connection. You are standing before love in its most authentic form. A love that builds itself patiently, quietly, faithfully, until one day, without warning, it becomes undeniable. On that day, you will not need to ask for promises. You will not need to seek reassurance. because the truth will already be written in both of you. You will simply know. You will walk in the same direction, not out of need, but out of choice, out of the quiet, unshakable certainty that when two souls recognize each other, nothing, no fear, no distance, no silence, can undo it. That is the mystery. That is the gift. And that is the truth of a love that is deeper than words.